Well, good morning and welcome. We convene this hearing as part of the committee's ongoing oversight of the Department of Energy to review how the department may improve its project management and its mission performance. The hearing will feature testimony from Daniel Poneman, the Deputy Secretary of Energy, who will describe and explain the reorganization of the department's management structure announced just last week by the new Secretary of Energy, Ernest Moniz. We'll also hear from Greg Friedman, the DOE Inspector General, and from David Trimble of the Government Accountability Office, both of whom will provide important context to help understand the potential of the Secretary's plans. Welcome, gentlemen. The announced reorganization makes some significant changes to the department's management structure with a more explicit focus on project management, so-called enterprise-wide mission support, and the integration of the agency's science and applied energy programs. The new structure will transform the Office of Undersecretary, which previously managed the department's energy programs, into the Office of Undersecretary for Management and Performance. Under this setup, a new Undersecretary will manage the agency's large and challenging environmental cleanup responsibilities, as well as a number of agency-wide mission support offices and national laboratory operations. The energy programs, including the Offices of Fossil Energy, Nuclear Energy, Energy Efficiency, and Renewable Energy, the Office of Electricity Delivery and Reliability, will now be managed more closely with the Department's Office of Science by an Undersecretary for Science and Energy. In addition, the Secretary plans to reform agency safety and security oversight and also plans to establish various secretarial councils to address select policy issues. On paper, these changes look like a positive step to help DOE address the tremendous challenges and opportunities before the agency. On the energy mission side, we know that the prospects of North American energy production have surpassed all expectations in recent years. How this agency integrates the strength of its world-class science and engineering with its applied energy and various energy infrastructure programs to help maximize the benefits of this new reality for the American public is of key importance. Meanwhile, DOE's core science and engineering missions must also confront the federal government's tremendous environmental responsibilities. 50 years of Cold War nuclear research, development, and weapons production have left behind contaminated waters and soils and tens of millions of gallons and millions of cubic meters of waste that must be cleaned up. Cleanup costs estimated at more than $250 billion, or a federal liability surpassed only by Social Security and Medicare. Repeated audits for this subcommittee by GAO have found that over the past 2 decades, DOE has suffered from substantial and continual weaknesses in effectively overseeing contractors and managing large, expensive, and technically complex projects. But multi-billion-dollar projects aren't the only problem. This past December, GAO told us that DOE did not have sufficient documentation to assess performance on almost 40% of its non-major projects, those costing less than $750 million. Lessons generated out of the serious security failure that occurred 1 year ago at the Y-12 site in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, has indicated how the successful reliance on department contractors depends on strong and clear lines of accountability and on meaningful and consistent measurement of contractor performance. Attempts to institute what's called the eyes-on, hands-off contractor oversight in recent years weakened accountability and were taken to a point that Washington had no clue about the mounting security risks in Tennessee. We heard testimony from then Secretary Stephen Chu's own outside advisors that the department's decentralized management of the national security sites allowed them to leverage their unique missions and geography to justify being held to different levels of security standards. Confused accountability and conflicting priorities and messages from Washington created a culture of what's called tolerating the intolerable, as one secretary advisors put it. That episode relates to DOE's governance of the nuclear security enterprise, but it points to accountability, management, and oversight issues that require constant attention across all of the agency's operations and projects if the agency is to perform its work safely, securely, and protective of taxpayers' dollars. Of course, whether and how the Secretary's efforts will help improve the documented deficiencies in the Department's performance will remain to be seen. The object of today's hearing is to build a record that will help the committee monitor progress and conduct constructive oversight in coming months. Our goal is to help ensure the Department can sustain management and performance improvements and develop a culture of accountability, safety, and security that extends throughout the agency's operations. With that in mind, I look forward to an informative hearing, and I now recognize for 5 minutes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Castor, who is sitting in today for Ranking Member DeGette.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Chairman Murphy. I'm glad we are here today to discuss management and performance issues at the Department of Energy. This committee has held a number of productive hearings on these important but sometimes overlooked areas. On this committee, there is a bipartisan consensus, and there has been for some time, regarding the importance of making sure that DOE is effectively managing its contractors and its environmental management and keeping the nuclear complex safe. The recent confirmation of Energy Secretary Moniz and his efforts to reorganize the department make this the perfect time to re-examine the long-standing agency weaknesses because for too long the structure and culture at DOE has allowed for inadequate focus on management and performance. Because of the size of the agency, the complexity of its mission, and its reliance on contractors, it is the largest civilian contracting agency in the federal government, it has proved difficult to set up effective performance and benchmarking procedures. But these tasks are essential in order to evaluate the quality of the work being carried out by the agency. So I'm interested in hearing from the witnesses today about the progress the Department of Energy has made in resolving these issues, and about the GAO and IG's recent work in the area. The Secretary's announcement last week regarding a DOE reorganization that created a new Undersecretary for Management and Performance is an encouraging development, and she must tackle these challenges head on. I'm eager to learn more about how exactly this role will function and how the new integrated organizational approach will further DOE's mission and help build a clean energy economy. It's a positive sign that DOE has a renewed commitment to resolving some of the thorny issues that have plagued the agency across multiple administrations. The effort must be sustained, and while there are no easy answers, I'm confident that these challenges are not insurmountable. The Government Accountability Office designated contract administration and project management as a high-risk area in 1990. That it remains on the list in 2013 is proof of both the mistakes that have been made since that time and the inherent challenges of managing one of the most complex federal agencies, especially when it comes to nuclear safety and security. Security lapses at the nation's nuclear weapons complex have been well documented, from the Los Alamos National Lab to the shocking breach last year at the Y-12 facility in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where an 83-year-old nun broke into what was supposed to be a highly secured area. GAO reported recently that DOE and NNSA continue to face challenges in ensuring that oversight of safety and performance activities is effective. I'd like to hear from DOE today about what more the agency can do to instill a culture of safety and what security measures have been put in place over the past year to ensure that critically important facilities are protected. The persistent issues at our nuclear facilities make very clear the need for strong oversight from this committee. Because DOE so heavily relies on contractors to carry out its mission activities, effective contractor governance is critical. But in January of this year, the Inspector General reported that despite at least 5 years of effort, NNSA had not yet implemented fully functional and effective contractor assurance systems. NNSA must improve upon these efforts. Finally, I continue to be concerned by DOE's long-standing problems relating to inaccurate cost estimates. The GAO has reported that cost estimate practices are not uniform and that cost estimating guidance is not up to date. The bottom line is here that taxpayers' dollars are at risk if the Department of Energy cannot accurately estimate costs. If we can conduct world-class nuclear research, then surely we can have consistent cost estimating practices. So I'd like to hear from the Deputy Secretary about what is being done to remedy these problems and how the new management structure will bring greater focus to these challenges. The restructuring at the Department of Energy presents an opportunity for a fresh start with respect to DOE's management and performance issues. There is bipartisan agreement that these issues must be taken seriously. So thank you, Chairman Murphy, for holding this hearing today, and I look forward to having a productive session.
Generally yields back. And now I recognize the Vice Chair of the full committee, Dr. Burgess, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our witnesses for being here today to help us as we study this subject. Last month, before the Subcommittee on Energy and Power, Secretary Moniz testified that he would be addressing the restructuring of management performance within the Department of Energy as one of his top priorities. This admission comes as welcome news to those of us who have been concerned for several terms of Congress about the structure of the Department of Energy. As such, it is the intention of this hearing to identify what concerns department officials have themselves and going forward to the extent that they can be remedied. And I can't help but reference, since the ranking member brought it up in her opening statement, in a previous subcommittee hearing many, many years ago, when the problems at Los Alamos Lab were surfacing, and apparently the thumb drive was a relatively new invention and was utilized for the inappropriate transfer of information. The response the director of Los Alamos was to fill the little USB ports with JB Weld, which did solve the problem temporarily, but I've got to believe that the clever criminal mind could find a way around that. Members of Congress are not the only ones who have apprehensions that the structure of Department of Energy has given rise to security risks and mismanagement. Because of the way the Department of Energy has been set up, in 1990, the Government Accountability Office designated the department's contract management as high risk, saying that inadequate oversight has left it ripe for fraud and abuse. For the most part, Department of Energy has tried to address such high-risk areas that the GAO has tried to address high-risk areas, and the GAO has since removed the designation from its Office of Science. Since being listed as high-risk, Department of Energy has also taken the initiative to implement a corrective action plan in hopes to be removed from the GAO's list. Despite this effort, a total of 12 projects are currently either at risk of breaching performance baselines or expected to breach performance baselines. Unfortunate incidents have occurred. A year ago, last July, anti-nuclear activists entered the Y-12 complex and spray-painted anti-war slogans on the exterior of a highly enriched uranium materials facility. A very dangerous exercise for them personally, and certainly exposed the risks at that facility. To date, the GAO, the Department of Energy, the Inspector General, and Secretary Moniz himself have stated that reorganization is paramount in order to address the future concerns of the Department of Energy. I will tell you as a physician that in order to prescribe the right medicine, you need to correctly diagnose the problem. So with that in mind, I'm looking forward to the testimony of our witnesses today, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Chairman yields back now to the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Waxman, California, for his
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your holding this hearing on management and performance at the Department of Energy. Secretary Moniz has gotten off to a very good start at DOE, and I'm pleased with the extent to which he has moved quickly to make positive changes since his confirmation. I think he has a good vision for the agency. The energy subject at the top of my priority list is climate change. Secretary Moniz understands the challenges posed by rising levels of carbon pollution. He will play a key role in the implementation of the President's National Climate Action Plan. His efforts to identify the threats our energy sector faces due to climate change and to improve energy efficiency are very important. I'm also impressed at the quick action he's taken to address the subject of this hearing, long-standing DOE problems with cost management, environmental compliance, and physical security at the nation's nuclear complex. These are not new problems at DOE. The agency is the largest civilian contractor in the federal government. For more than 20 years, dating to the first President Bush, GAO has placed DOE contract management on its high-risk list. As one of his first acts, Secretary Moniz announced a reorganization that will create a new Undersecretary for Management and Performance. The President has nominated Beth Robinson, currently NASA's Chief Financial Officer, to fill the position. This restructuring will put one official in charge of strengthening environmental cleanup, contracting oversight, human capital, and other important functions. I'm interested in learning today about how this reorganization will strengthen lines of authority, program oversight, and internal coordination. And I appreciate that Deputy Secretary Poneman is here today to discuss these changes and to explain to us how this new focus will represent an improvement over previous agency efforts. I also appreciate that DOE Inspector General and Mr. Trimble from GAO are here to provide their views on these changes. Mr. Chairman, I hope this is not the last hearing we'll hold on this subject. This committee has held multiple hearings on the subject of DOE management. Most recently, we held a hearing in March on the alarming incident involving an 83-year-old breaking into the highly secure DOE Y-12 facility in Tennessee. One of the conclusions from that hearing was that NNSA and DOE and their contractors need more oversight from within their own agencies, from Congress, and from independent entities like GAO and the Inspector General. The organizational changes announced by Secretary Moniz are promising. We know that the longstanding problems at DOE will not be easy to solve, but the Department of Energy's vital missions to develop new clean energy technologies and protect our nuclear stockpile are too important to the nation for us to ignore. I look forward to today's hearing and appreciate the committee's efforts to make sure that DOE's project management and mission performance improvements are on track. I want to apologize in advance to the witnesses. I think every subcommittee of this committee is having meetings simultaneously this morning, and so I'm telling each one that when I'm not present, I'm at the other one, and then I'm going to go fishing. No, I will be in one hearing or the other, and I'll try to get back here, Mr. Chairman.
We thank the ranking member for being omnipresent as well. And the same goes for the chairman of the full committee. Mr. Upton will probably be joining us in and out here, but thank you. Now want to introduce our witnesses for today. I mentioned them before, but let me give a little more background. And first is the Honorable Daniel Poneman. Am I pronouncing that right, sir? The Deputy Secretary for the U.S. Department of Energy, and as Deputy Secretary, he also serves as the Chief Operating Officer of the Department. Nominated to this position by the President on April 20th, 2009, confirmed by the Senate later, and in addition, between April and May of 2013, was the Acting Secretary of Energy. Good to have you here, sir. Second witness is the Honorable Gregory Friedman, the Inspector General for the U.S. Department of Energy. In this capacity, he is responsible for nationwide independent program of audits, inspections, and law enforcement efforts related to the Department of Energy's programs and operations. In addition to these responsibilities, Mr. Friedman also serves as a member of the Recovery Act Accountability and Transparency Board and the Government Accountability and Transparency Board. Third witness, David Trimble, serves as Director in the U.S. Government Accountability Office Natural Resources and Environmental Group. In this role, he provides leadership and oversight on U.S. and international nuclear security and cleanup issues, including a number of projects conducted for this subcommittee. I'll now swear in the witnesses. As you are aware, this committee is holding an investigative hearing, and when doing so, has a practice of taking testimony under oath. Do any of you have any objections to testifying under oath? Right, thank you. The chair then advises you that in order to that under the rules of the House and rules of the committee, you are entitled to be advised by counsel. Do you desire to be advised by counsel during the hearing today? None of the witnesses wish to be advised by counsel. So in that case, if you'd please rise, raise your right hand, I'll swear you in. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. All the witnesses answered in the affirmative, so you are now under oath and subject to the penalties set forth in Title 18, Section 1001 of the United States Code. You may now each give a 5-minute summary of your written statement. We'll begin with Mr. Poneman.
Thank you, Chairman Murphy, Ranking Member Castor, and distinguished members of this subcommittee. I want to thank you all for the opportunity to discuss with you today the Department of Energy's ongoing efforts to improve its management and performance. In the past month, the President has given 2 major policy speeches, and the work that we do at the Department of Energy lies at the heart of both of these issues. On June 19th in Berlin, the President echoed the nuclear security vision he first laid out in his 2009 Prague speech, calling on the global community to secure vulnerable materials, combat nuclear terrorism and proliferation, and build a sustainable and secure nuclear energy industry. As long as nuclear weapons exist, it is also this Department's responsibility to ensure that the U.S. nuclear stockpile remains safe, secure, and effective. Less than a week later, at Georgetown University, the President laid out a common-sense plan to reduce the effects of climate change by cutting dangerous carbon pollution, increasing the production of clean energy, and doubling down on energy efficiency. As the President said, and I'm quoting, "A low-carbon clean energy economy can be an engine of growth for decades to come," close quote. By taking action to reduce carbon pollution, the United States can spark new jobs and industries, building cleaner and more efficient energy technologies. These presidential priorities demand the best from us in terms of our performance, and so last week, Secretary Moniz and I announced a reorganization that will better focus our efforts on all 4 mission areas of the Department: nuclear security, solving the nation's energy challenges, advancing fundamental science, and environmental stewardship. For the Department to carry out our critical work in these areas, the Secretary has made clear that we must renew our focus on improving our management and performance and addressing the challenges that the Department has faced for its entire history. And in doing so, we will follow the President's direction to us earlier this month when he instructed his Cabinet to develop an aggressive management agenda for his second term, and I'm quoting the President again, that delivers a smarter, more innovative, and more accountable government for its citizens, close quote. The first major component of the reorganization expands the portfolio of the statutory Undersecretary for Science to include the energy technology portfolio, establishing the Office of the Undersecretary for Science and Energy. Successful innovation for implementing the President's all-of-the-above energy strategy requires the ability closely to integrate basic science, applied research, and technology demonstration. This is especially important in light of the urgency of addressing climate change and the need rapidly to develop technologies to materially alter the trajectory of greenhouse gas pollution. The second major component of the reorganization consolidates the primary mission and operational support functions of the Department within the offices of the Undersecretary for Management and Performance, and also includes the Office of Environmental Management and the Office of Legacy Management as part of its structure and functions. Moving the Office of Environmental Management under the purview of the Undersecretary for Management and Performance brings the Department's strongest project management capabilities resident within the Office of Acquisition and Project Management directly to bear on one of the Department's most vexing yet vital challenges, cleaning up the nuclear waste that is a legacy byproduct of the Cold War. In addition, transferring the offices of Environmental Management and Legacy Management from the Undersecretary for Nuclear Security will allow this Undersecretary to focus exclusively on the NNSA's forward-looking missions while entrusting the Environmental Management mission to an organization devoted to solving management challenges. Aside from increasing the management resources available to oversee large projects, consolidating mission support functions in the Office of the Undersecretary for Management and Performance will place a senior policy official dedicated to the task of management improvement on a full-time basis. The consolidation of these mission support functions, such as the Office of Management and Administration and the Office of the Chief Human Capital Officer, will clarify and strengthen the lines of authority and accountability of these functions. The goal will be to institute enterprise-wide solutions to common challenges faced by program offices across the complex, such as information management, acquisition, and human resources. Within the Office of Management and Performance, we will also establish a new organizational unit, the National Laboratory Operations Board. It will have responsibility for oversight of administrative, mission support, and infrastructure management of the National Laboratory System. The third component increases coordination across the Department. For a number of important cross-cutting policy issues that affect a number of programs across the Department, the Secretary has established the following secretarial councils: an Energy Council, a National Laboratory Policy Council, a revised Credit Review Board, including the establishment of a new Risk Committee, and a Cybersecurity Council. I'd like to bring to your attention 2 final areas in which we are seeking to improve coordination between program offices: policy formation and physical security management. First, we are examining opportunities for consolidating and upgrading the policy analysis functions of the Department. This capability will be needed to support the government-wide quadrennial energy review the President called for in his June 25th climate speech at Georgetown University. The core of our new systems analysis capability will be formed from the existing Office of Policy and International Affairs. We will also examine opportunities to draw from the policy expertise of the program offices. A second area under careful study is security management. I have previously testified before this subcommittee on the Department's management of security and improvements we have made in the wake of last year's Y-12 incident, but this is a matter of such seriousness that we must always continue our efforts to improve our performance, and I very much take account of the, I think, wise words of the Chairman and Ranking Member here on that subject this morning. This includes thorough examination of broad issues of governance as they relate to the security of our Category 1 nuclear materials. In recent months, we have been engaged in a thorough review of our security management, not just within NNSA or at the labs, but enterprise-wide, including assignment of authority and responsibility, contracting, performance measurement, and accountability. Finally, the Department, under the leadership of Secretary Moniz, has made management improvement a top priority, and we are aggressively pursuing a broad agenda of initiatives. The Secretary has challenged us to further elevate our performance, and I appreciate the opportunity to appear before this subcommittee to discuss our efforts to do so, and of course, I would be pleased to answer any questions from subcommittee members. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Friedman, 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Castor, members of the subcommittee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify at your request on the major challenges facing the Department of Energy. The Department is, as has been described, responsible for executing some of the nation's most complex and technologically advanced missions. The Office of Inspector General provides independent oversight of the Department's operations to promote economy and efficiency and to detect and prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. My office annually identifies what it considers to be the most significant management challenges facing the Department. For 2013, this list includes operational efficiency and cost savings, contract and financial assistance award management, cybersecurity, energy supply, environmental cleanup, human capital management, nuclear waste disposal, safeguards and security, and stockpile stewardship. Because of their complexity, these challenges are not amenable to immediate resolution. Therefore, they must be addressed through a sustained effort over time. In 2012 and 2013, due to what appeared to us to be obvious looming budget constraints, we identified operational efficiency and cost savings as the Department's preeminent management challenge. In doing so, we presented the Department with the 5 suggestions to optimize operations. These include applying the quadrennial technology review strategic planning concept to the Department's entire science and technology portfolio, eliminating costly duplicative National Nuclear Security Administration functions, evaluating, consolidating, and/or right-sizing the Department's laboratory and technology complex, reprioritizing the Department's environmental remediation efforts with the goal of funding work on a risk basis, and realigning the current structure of the Department's physical security apparatus. These suggestions provide only a starting point for further discussion and examination. They represent approaches that we readily acknowledge are difficult to implement, highly controversial, and politically challenging. Virtually all of our work intersects with one or more of the management challenges that I alluded to earlier. In my written statement, I've summarized 3 recent reports that are reflective of this relationship. These include, first, contract management, project management, and quality assurance concerns with the Department's contractor-managed construction of the waste treatment and immobilization plant, the WTP, at Hanford, Washington. The current cost estimate for the WTP project is over $12 billion, or 3 times larger than its original budget. Second, issues relating to the implementation and effectiveness of contractor assurance systems by NNSA and its contractors. And finally, efforts by the Department to reduce international travel as a means of reducing federal expenditures. In its invitation letter, the subcommittee expressed specific interest in the status of project management at the Department. Your interest reflects a concern that we share and one that is clearly of prime importance to the Department's senior leaders. The Department currently has several major projects, including the WTP, that are significantly over budget and face considerable delays. As I have testified previously, there are several common threads central to these and related contract and project management problems. Improvements are needed to ensure that project scopes and supporting cost estimates are realistic, manageable, recognizing the technical challenges facing many Department efforts. That change control management is adequate and project baselines are updated on a real-time basis to maintain their effectiveness as a primary tool. Contract terms are kept current to track with project events. Contractor performance is measured against established metrics, including realistic and reliable cost estimates. Federal staffing is sufficient both in terms of size and expertise to provide effective contract and project oversight. And finally, the project have focused, empowered, and consistent federal project manager leadership throughout their life cycle. As Deputy Secretary Poneman has discussed, Secretary Moniz recently unveiled a new structure for the department, which is designed to focus on key programmatic priorities in agency performance and management. We are hopeful that the new initiatives, as widespread as they are, as has been described by the Deputy Secretary, will help to address the department's management challenges. We look forward to working with Secretary Moniz, Deputy Secretary Poneman, program officials, and the Congress to enhance departmental operations, and in so doing, to advance the interest of the U.S. taxpayers. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, this concludes my statement. I'd be pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
I think I apologize. I had to step out of the room for a second. Mr. Trimble.
Chairman Murphy, Ranking Member Castor, and members of the subcommittee. My testimony today discusses our observations on the management challenges facing DOE. My observations are drawn from our past work, which has highlighted the challenges DOE faces in project and contract management, security and safety, and producing reliable enterprise-wide management information. Regarding project and contract management, DOE has made progress in managing the cost and schedule of non-major projects, those costing less than $750 million, and in recognition of this progress, we narrowed the focus of our high-risk designation to major contracts in progress. Major projects, however, continue to pose a challenge for EM and NNSA. All of the ongoing major projects continue to experience significant cost increases and schedule delays. UPF costs have increased sevenfold, up to $6.5 billion for a project with a reduced scope and 11 years added to the schedule. MOX costs have increased fivefold, up to $7.7 billion, with 15 years added to the schedule. Notably, since 2010 alone, cost increases have totaled $2.8 billion for a project originally estimated to cost $1.4 billion. WTP has tripled in cost to over $12 billion, with a decade added to its schedule. Moreover, we found that DOE prematurely rewarded the contractor for resolving technical issues and completing work. We are currently assessing DOE cost estimating policies and practices and plan to issue a report later this year. Regarding security, over a decade after NNSA was created to address security issues, the Y-12 security incident has raised concern that NNSA has still not embraced security as an essential element of its mission. Multiple investigations into the security breach identified significant deficiencies in NNSA's security organization, oversight, and culture. DOE and NNSA have taken a number of actions, including repairing security equipment, reassigning key security personnel, and firing the Y-12 Protective Force contractor. DOE and NNSA's leadership have also committed to additional actions, such as revamping the security oversight model. DOE has a long history of security breakdowns and an equally long history of instituting responses and remedies to fix these problems. In recent testimony, the leader of the NSA's Security Task Force examining the Y-12 incident identified problems with NNSA's federal security organization. Notably, in 2003, we reported on these very same problems which have persisted or resurfaced, notwithstanding numerous DOE initiatives to fix or address them. The key challenge going forward will not be how to implement security improvements, but how to sustain them. Regarding safety, in September 2012, we testified before this subcommittee noting that DOE's recent safety reforms may have actually weakened independent oversight. Notably, since this testimony, reports by DOE have continued to identify safety concerns at Pantex and other DOE sites. In regard to important enterprise-level management information, such as budgetary and cost data, in June 2010, we examined NNSA's program to operate and maintain weapons facilities and infrastructure and found that NNSA could not accurately identify the total cost for this congressionally directed program, and NNSA's budget justification understated these costs by over $500 million. In July 2012, we found deficiencies in NNSA's validation of budget requests for its programs and concluded that these weaknesses impacted the credibility and reliability of those budget estimates. According to NNSA's officials, the agency's experience and trust in its contractors minimized the need for such review. Without accurate cost and budget data, DOE will continue to be surprised by cost and schedule problems in its projects and programs, and Congress will not have the information it needs to oversee the billions provided yearly in appropriations. In closing, let me observe that the Department's most significant mission accomplishments, such as keeping the stockpiles safe and reliable, successfully closing nuclear facilities such as the old Rocky Flats plant, consolidating nuclear material, and energy and science breakthroughs are too often overshadowed by repeated project cost overruns, schedule delays, glaring security incidents, and safety mishaps. Until these key management issues are addressed, such problems will continue to cast a shadow over DOE's mission accomplishments. Key step in addressing these longstanding issues will be for DOE to embrace sound project management, credible security and safety programs, and reliable management information systems as key elements of the Department's mission instead of impediments to this mission. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I'll begin question here and recognize myself for 5 minutes. So, Mr. Poneman, let me understand your role here. You're Deputy Secretary and therefore the Chief Operating Officer of the Department, and you've had a direct role managing the program execution and the mission support functions of the agency, and directly responsible to the Secretary for managing and implementing these organizational changes, and you've been doing about 4 years. So lots of firsthand experience. You've been at this as well. So would you explain why the Undersecretary for Performance and Management will help improve project management in the Department overall?
Yes, sir. I'm very excited about this opportunity precisely because, as you noted, I have been the Chief Operating Officer, and all of the burdens which you yourself and ranking members have identified, as well as those we've just heard from the other witnesses, show you what we're up against. We had, frankly, improvised an Associate Deputy Secretary in the first term to try to enhance our capacity to tackle these problems, recognizing the full weight of the problems, and frankly, having the leadership of Secretary Moniz from his earlier experience at the Department as Undersecretary and including his more recent experience writing very thoughtfully about how to organize the Department better to tackle these challenges as a member of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. It was clear that the opportunity presented by taking one of the available undersecretary positions in the Department and having that individual, an individual of authority and in whom the Secretary and myself could repose confidence to work full-time on these problems, was absolutely critical to getting our arms around this very daunting agenda.
I appreciate the level of what you're facing here, too. And so how would we be able to measure progress, and are you setting some performance baselines?
So it would depend on the precise mission areas. There are some, Mr. Chairman, across the board kinds of metrics that we can apply. And let me just start from the outset, and responding also to the ranking member's comment. This aspect of metrics and cost estimation and measurement performance is absolutely critical to our success. If you don't measure it, you don't manage it. But let me take just a largest example, these very large, complex capital projects. We have to have a system of evaluation that measure continuously whether we are on or off budget, whether we are on or off schedule, and at the same time to measure whether we're on or off meeting the spec of the project itself. That is to say, it's not enough to have a project being on schedule and on budget if it doesn't do the job. And Mr. Trimble alluded to this peripherally in his comments. So we have to make sure that we take the orders that are in place in terms of cost estimation under Order 413B and actually measure it, have them uploaded into our business management systems that we put into our quarterly reviews of the business quarterly review required by the Government Performance and Requirements Act, and that's a start on how we're going to measure our performance.
Thank you. There's two other quick questions I want to get into in terms of lessons learned in remanaging things. Over the past 3 years, this committee has dealt with a number of cases, Solyndra, Fisker, A123, as you know, and where loan or grant assessments just turned out to be plain wrong. And we've had a number of people before this committee talking about this. You had a policy interest to push these out, but the data, as it turns out, just didn't add up for this. So how will the management changes ensure that decisions are made based on sound analysis moving forward?
Well, first, Mr. Chairman, let me note that the portfolio as a whole, which has been very thoroughly reviewed by many, including by the late Mr. Herb Allison, is actually performing quite well. We have the largest wind farm in the world operating quite well, largest photovoltaic plant operating quite well. Tesla has repaid its loan nine years early. We do the best due diligence we can. These programs are intended to promote innovation, and unfortunately, not every case works out. That having been said, we've done a number of things recommended by Mr. Ellison, and we've brought new leadership and new staffing inside the loan program office to make sure that, again, we have a very strong ability to monitor the existing portfolio, that we have a new risk officer set up to look precisely at the questions of risk that you're addressing, and that we have a much more open and transparent set of data flowing up from the program office to the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary.
I appreciate just something that we'll be watching is a lot of data was there before. We just thought a lot of it was also ignored. Multiple departments are saying the cylinder loan wasn't a good idea. So it isn't just a matter of having that data, but making sure you have a system in place to have honest reassessments of that. One other quick question, my time. In your testimony, you said the President laid out a common-sense plan to reduce the effects of climate change by cutting dangerous carbon pollution, as you put it, increasing the production of clean energy, and doubling down on energy efficiency. I noticed the Department released a new rule for microwave oven efficiencies and included a calculation for the social cost of carbon. And I would like to know if the agency considered doing a formal notice and comment to the microwave rule before using this figure. Did anyone in your office participate in any discussions about this social cost of carbon before using it in the DOE microwave rule? And can you please submit to us emails and documents to help us understand why that was done?
Mr. Chairman, I was present for some discussion of social cost of carbon. I was not. I would have to get back to you with details on how it related to that particular.
We like that. That's going to be something this committee is going to want to review in an open and scientific way.
We'd be very happy to
Thank
supply
you.
the.
I see my time's expired now. Go to Ms. Castor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Murphy. It's very important and a positive sign that the Department of Energy has taken action here with the reorganization to address the persistent flaws in management and oversight at the Department of Energy. We've seen that in many cases there is duplicative activity, unnecessary expenditures because of lack of coordination and effective oversight of contractors, and DOE has been facing these problems for years. And your predecessors in multiple administrations from both political parties have made little headway. So is this new Undersecretary of Management Performance a sign that the Department of Energy has learned the lessons of the past?
Congresswoman, we are always seeking to learn lessons from the past. I personally am learning lessons every single day, and our management principles require us to do that. That we will.
What makes it different this time?
Well, if I may suggest a couple of things, Congresswoman. Number one, both Secretary Moniz and as the Chairman alluded, I have been working on this for some period of time, so we understand from having witnessed firsthand some of the very problems that you all have described what has caused some of those problems. We believe that the structure the Secretary has designed here is well suited to give us the capacity to do better in achieving these results. And I would actually echo Mr. Trimble's comments. The test here isn't can we impose a new bureaucratic structure on the building. The question is, can we sustain it? Mm-hmm. The results, in our judgment, will be the proof of the pudding. If we can, in this reorganization, which we think suits the problems well, start to deliver those kinds of results this committee and our department want to see, that will take root in the department, and the people, the professionals, will continue.
Give us a specific example, something the IG or GAO has highlighted that you think or you can show early signs in progress.
Yeah, I'll give you one very specific example. Many of you have alluded to the fact that since 1990 we've been on the high-risk list. The GAO has given us 5 specific taskings on what it takes to get out from under the high-risk list. The Office of Science got out in 2009. I will tell you, Congressman, we were very gratified that the projects up to $750 million came out from under. Why did that happen? Because they, at GAO, said what you need to do is break down very big projects to chunkable sizes that can be managed more effectively. That's simply one example of many I could cite of where we've taken the advice from the GAO, applied it, and actually obtained a much better result in terms of projects coming in on budget and on time.
And Mr. Friedman, I know you agree that the contractor workforce needs more vigorous oversight at the Department of Energy.
I do.
Correct. You've stated that again and again. What recommendations, highlight the your most important recommendations from the IG's office to ensure that DOE contractors are meeting their performance standards?
Well, I think the Deputy Secretary referred to it, and others have as well, and that is the question of sustainability. I think it's an excellent point. I've been around long enough, Ms. Castor, unfortunately, in a sense, to have seen the department through valleys and mountaintops for years, and invariably a fix is imposed or attempted, but it loses power after a period of time. We get lethargic, or the department gets lethargic. So sustainability, it seems to me, in that process is key. So if the reforms that the Deputy Secretary has described, if they address the problem, if we sustain them going forward, we really will have moved the department forward.
And in your testimony, you noted that contractor weaknesses were not effectively communicated to senior management officials. Do you believe that the new Undersecretary for Management and Performance could help strengthen the lines of communication?
I hope that's the case, and it's more than just the mere establishment of the Undersecretary's position, which I think is an interesting concept and I think has great possibilities. It has to permeate the entire organization, that people at all levels in the field, in headquarters, feel that they can surface problems to the department's leadership in a way that, number one, of course, they won't be subjected to retaliation, but more importantly, that they can see meaningful steps taken in response to that information to try to address the underlying root causes of the problems.
Thank you. Mr. Trimble, GAO has reported that DOE's contractor assurance systems are producing inconsistent results across the agency. Can you elaborate on this finding, and what are the ramifications of these inconsistencies, and how can DOE improve?
Well, I think the cost overruns and the schedule delays are indicative of that. I think what we've seen in our ongoing work looking at MOX and UPF is some concerns where there are the information system being reported to the government. There are red lights on the dashboard indicating problems, and the key question that we're getting at is what's being done when those lights go off, and are people recognizing them, and are they taking action? Is the action effective? And so again, there's, it's sort of the proof in the pudding argument. You can establish systems, but then do you have processes to act on the information you get, and does the organization support that? And there's a parallel here between the problems we've seen on the security side, where this culture has been highlighted, where you can have rules, but if the organizational culture is not to abide by the rules, things don't happen. There's that same challenge here on cost and schedule management. You can have processes and organizations, but everyone has to walk the talk for it to work. And that's sort of where again, a big part of the challenge facing the department is going to lie.
Thank you, gentlemen. Time's expired. I'll recognize the Vice Chairman, Dr. Burgess, for 5 minutes.
Well, Mr. Trimble and Inspector Friedman, let's follow up on that about walking the talk. How do you know, Inspector Friedman, that stuff is going to get reported? In the management plan, you're proposing that now there is greater flexibility and freedom for people to report problems as they're identified.
Dr. Burgess, I'm not instituting. I don't manage the department, obviously, and I'm not instituting the new process. The Deputy Secretary and the Secretary are.
But do you have
the test? But I think I understand your question. I think the test will be if the very core issues that we're talking about here, and the reason that you're holding, one of the reasons that you're holding this hearing, if those issues are addressed through an open line of communications, and we can demonstrate that the communications are working, we reduce the number of complaints we get from employees who say that their concerns are not being addressed. We can gauge that quite effectively as to whether the process is working.
So, and then from that, do you have confidence that the process is working?
At this point, I don't have that confidence. If we reconvene at some point in the future, if we have a time to see the new system in place and take a look at it and evaluate it, I'll be more than happy to come back and give you my view.
Well, I suspect we will have another. You've been kind to be with us several times, and I suspect that we'll have an opportunity to talk. Secretary Poneman, can you address that?
Yes, sir. It's a work in progress. We actually measure it quite regularly. We have self-evaluations. We have third parties come in and they evaluate. I personally have spent hours and hours speaking to 4,000 people out at Hanford, making sure people understand there can be no retaliation for people coming forward expressing their concerns. We had I put out quarterly a notice saying anyone has a differing professional opinion can be heard, and we actually had the experience of a differing professional opinion be sustained as we reviewed it. There's never grounds for complacency. As others have said, it's a cultural issue. We got to keep working at it. We'll never be perfect, but we are trying to improve it at a cultural level, at an institutional level, and we're trying to measure it on a periodic basis. You made the very good point in your opening statement. We got to measure these things, or we're not going to know if we're doing better.
Yeah, the chance to measure is a chance to cure. And
your point about the diagnosis is critical. Absolutely.
Well, just as far as developing that culture of accountability within the department, how do you feel that is going? You don't get the impression from Mr. Trimble that it's quite where it needs to be, but where do you think?
I think, Congressman, there too, it is a work in process. Actually, the sunshine of some of the things the President has required in terms of disclosure of our results on the Internet, I think is a very powerful tool. As has been noted by many members of this committee, much of our work is performed by contractors. They are indeed sensitive to how their work is evaluated and how that is disclosed. Again, I think we've improved it. One critical thing I'd like to note, Congressman, is we have made it a policy of this department to align the taxpayer incentives and interests with those of the contractors, so we cannot get into a situation in which the contractor can do well and the taxpayer do poorly.
Well, let me ask you a question about that, because, I mean, obviously these are labs. They involve scientists, and you want your scientists to do your best work. And how do you ensure that that deliverable for the President and the Congress and the taxpayer does not get in the way of delivering on the scientific product that's required?
You have just put your finger on an absolutely critical factor. People sometimes lose sight of the fact that these labs have produced the most awesome intellectual property in history, beginning with the weapon that won World War II. The last thing we want to do is to stifle that creativity. So what we need to do is give these people the tools and the authority to get their work done, but we have to have in exchange transparency into what they are doing, because we are the owners on behalf of the taxpayer to have the transparency to hold them accountable to the results that we expect from them.
And just since you brought up Los Alamos, I took a visit out there in 2005, it's a long time ago now, and their security detail, they apparently had been tested and found wanting at some point in the past. They were fairly sensitive about it and demonstrated that sensitivity to me with what they were able to do, which is why when we had the hearing on the Y-12, I didn't understand how those people could be in the audience that day. I thought they should be interred in some place because of the response of the security team when you wander into the kill zone. You don't ask questions, you take them out. So what am I missing on that?
Congressman, you're not missing a thing. We discussed this before. That was an unforgivable breach. The cameras were out. The guards were not responding properly. We have taken all of the immediate steps that we could, including aligning the security Proforce subcontract under the management and operations contract, including removing the responsible individuals. But we are continuing, as I said earlier, to look at the broader systemic changes that we need to do to make sure, per Mr. Trimble, that these changes that we've started are sustained.
Would you give advice to the protesting public to not try this again?
Yes, I surely would, because what was a very terrible episode could have been tragic with loss of life consequences.
Yes, it could. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you. Now, recognize Mr. Lewin for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and thank you and to the ranking member for calling this important hearing. Mr. Poneman, could you help me understand how the reorganization is going to help with management of the national labs? There are a number of new entities concerning the labs that have different responsibilities and reporting chains. These include the National Lab Operations Board, which reports to the new Undersecretary of Management and Performance, the National Lab Policy Council reporting to the Secretary, in addition to the Undersecretary for Science and Energy, has primary responsibility for many labs, while the Undersecretary for Nuclear Security has responsibility for the rest. Is this going to result in more inspections and transactional oversight at the labs, or less but more effective inspections and oversight, as a number of experts have called for?
Congressman, I don't think the metric won't be number of inspections per se, but rather the results which we will endeavor to measure. But let me try to make sense of what sounded a bit intensive in terms of the kind of oversight from your comment. The National Laboratory Council is absolutely critical to the point Dr. Burgess just raised. We need to make sure that we get together with all the lab directors, the fountainhead of our innovation, and think through what are we trying to do as a nation in support of the President. The very first meeting that Secretary Moniz had out of town, and a rare time we traveled together, was to Oak Ridge to meet with all of them. That's on big think, what are we trying to do? The Lab Operations Board that will report to this new Undersecretary will deal with all of those issues, like real estate and IT purchases and cybersecurity that will enable the smart scientists to do the innovative work. So actually, it's a much more operational, hands-on thing. I don't think you're going to find it a cluttered system in practice, but we'd be very happy to stay in touch with you as we roll it forward.
Well, that's what I'm hoping, is that we don't have a cluttered system, that there's not just layers and layers that are put on top of each other, but that we do follow many of the suggestions that have been put forth. That way it's effective, that the time that's used to be able to go in and look is effective, and we're able to identify things. Do you foresee any structural changes to NNSA besides moving environmental management from NNSA to the Undersecretary for Management and Performance?
Congressman, I make two comments. Number one, as I've alluded to, we have received further thoughtful input from a number of wise people, including some who I think have visited with this committee, on structural changes to enhance our security, our physical security, especially for Cat 1 nuclear materials. And we are actually, even as we speak, having people look deeply at that so Secretary Moniz can make some decisions in the near term. That said, as you well know, there's a congressional mandated panel that's been empowered to look at these governance issues, and as they continue their work, we'll, of course, be in touch with them and look forward to hearing what their results are and seeing what further actions, if any, are required.
Okay. Under the reorganization, the Technology Transfer Coordinator would be put within the Office of the Undersecretary for Science and Energy. While this Undersecretary does have responsibility for most of the labs and basic and applied science programs at the department, it does not include the NNSA laboratories. What will be done to ensure the Tech Transfer Coordinator will be able to coordinate technology transfer activities across the entire department, which spans 2 undersecretaries, and will not prevent the NNSA laboratories from participating?
Congressman, the entire thrust of the reorganization has been to put stronger leadership at the top, precisely so that we can enhance our ability to catch these cross-cutting issues. I can tell you, because we've already been doing it, this is the practice that we have already engaged in. And one example, which would apply equally when we get the new Tech Transfer Coordinator, is cybersecurity. We have cybersecurity all across all portfolios of the department, and we have now constituted the Cybersecurity Council to make sure that we get that kind of cross-cut, that we don't miss a bet in terms of getting the tech transfer. Some of the innovation out of the national labs could be very, very important in the science and energy portfolio.
I'm certainly hopeful that there won't be more burdensome restrictions put on the NNSA laboratories versus the other labs when it comes to tech transfer. So I'm encouraged by that, Mr. Poneman. Mr. Friedman, there was an incident in which in New Mexico you identified a contractor that was overpaid. You brought it to the attention based on a request from NNSA, where minimum requirements have to be met by contractors in order for these contractors to get paid. Can you talk about that and what we can do to prevent that from happening in the future?
Well, one of the problems we have, Mr. Lujan, DOE has an incredible structure of prime contracts, and a significant subtext of that is the subcontractors and secondary and tertiary subcontractors that it has. One of the responsibilities of the prime contractors is, in fact, to make sure that the subcontractors are responding appropriately, that are paid appropriately, and the taxpayers are treated fairly in this process. One of the promising things that we've seen is a number of referrals from prime contractors, including those in New Mexico, if I might, of cases where they believe the subcontractors have not acted appropriately in one way or another. So we take those cases very seriously, and a lot of our work is done with the subcontractors to the prime contractors. That is the national labs in the case of New Mexico.
I appreciate that. And Mr. Chairman, this may be an area where the committee as a whole, that we can try to get all of the additional information or whatever has not been released thus far in regards to this instance and maybe some others, so that way we can see if there's going to be any additional information released on this matter or whatever has not been made public. So appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, and look forward to working with you in the committee on this. Thank you again for the responses.
Acknowledge the gentleman's comments, and now recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith. 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The other chairman asked some questions that raised some issues for me that I hadn't really planned on getting into today, but I guess this is as good a time as any. When you talk about trying to, reorganize and make things more efficient, are you just rearranging the deck chairs, or are we actually having some personnel changes? And let me tell you what I'm referencing in specifics. I have always been bothered by the Solyndra situation, and the response, as yours was today, is we try to do what we can in our due diligence, et cetera. And I accept that, notwithstanding the fact, as the permanent chairman said of this subcommittee, but there were warning signs out there. I've always been concerned with the subordination issue and the fact that, to me, in my opinion, it was a horrendous legal advice. I really don't think it was well done. And I'm wondering if that department is also being reorganized in any way to try to make sure that when Congress says that money is not to be subordinated, that doesn't mean you can do a loan at 11 and subordinate at 12 because you didn't do it at the time of the closing. And that was basically what we heard in that investigation. Can you answer that for me or in that matter?
Let me offer a couple of comments, Congressman. First of all, in terms of your appropriate question of the structural changes, we didn't start with this reorganization. We started, of course, with the Allison report, and many of those, and as you saw, he said the health of the portfolio was strong. That said, he had a number of very important practical suggestions in terms of transparency, accountability, customer servicing, portfolio management, and many of those have been implemented, point one. Point two, that included making sure we had very highly capable people in the positions. Point three, a lot of those people are very much focused on portfolio management, and there was a brand new leader of the loan program office. And finally, in this reorganization, Secretary Moniz wants to make sure that the credit review board itself, which sits above the credit committee, is strengthened so that we'll have the ability in the normal kind of boardroom fashion of doing due diligence on transactions to make sure we bring those kinds of disciplines to bear.
Because one of my concerns there was it appeared that the legal counsel that was being given was seeing, and this is my interpretation, nobody ever said this, saw itself as trying to come up with a legal opinion to justify what the Department of Energy wanted to do as opposed to protecting the American taxpayers. And I would hope that the legal department would see as a part of their duty at the very least is to make sure that what they're doing is lawful, because the laws that Congress passed are intended to protect American taxpayers, and the decision to subordinate cost $170 million to the American taxpayers.
Congressman, it's I would have to dig back into the details to get that, but I would just say my recollection of the legal advice received at the time was that there was a higher chance of a higher recovery from a going concern than from a fire sale. And the question at the time that was presented was whether subordination would meet the statutory requirement to the Secretary was obliged to seek the maximum recovery for the taxpayer. But we can obviously follow up on that.
Yeah, and I would like you to follow up on what's happened, because while I think that may have been the party line, so to speak, when you looked at it, the rules that were required to follow to make that decision, even though subordination was not lawful, the following rules in other situations to do that were also not followed. So it was just a big mess, and it cost the taxpayers a lot of money. Inspector General, in that same regard, at the time, I asked some questions that you were unable to answer for me because the investigation had not yet been completed. I'm not asking you to answer questions that you can't, and we'll probably use another day to get into that. But has that investigation been completed on the internal workings at the Department of Energy in regard to the subordination issue?
Mr. Griffith, both the Justice Department and our office are prepared to say that there is an active investigation, a criminal investigation ongoing. And as much as I would love to be able to answer your question, and I truly would,
I just want to know if it was still ongoing.
to try to do that.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Back to you, Deputy Secretary. As a part of this, another issue has been brought to my attention, and I'm not going to tell you I'm well versed in it, but it does concern me, and that relates to the National Nuclear Security Administration and the National Security Complex and Pantex plant management contracts. And in that process, GAO has said that there was they upheld a procurement protest. My concern on that is that apparently, according to a press report that has been brought to me, in 3 instances, the source selection authority at the 11th hour changed some of the criteria. And I know all these big companies are jockeying for position, but at the 11th hour, 3 matters were changed, and that changed who got the contract. On its face, that doesn't smell right to me. Are you all looking into that matter and trying to make sure those things don't happen?
Congressman, precisely because if I understand which procurement you're talking about, it's still open and we're still working it. I cannot comment on what we're doing, but obviously we do everything possible to make sure that we hew to all of the requirements, statutory, regulatory, and ethical that apply.
Well, you can understand my concern. You can understand my concern when rules are changed at the last minute. It's hard for people to honestly compete.
That gentleman's time has expired. We'll go to the
Thank
gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green. 5 minutes for your questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In today's testimony from the GAO and the Inspector General, we've heard how many instances of significant cost increases for major environmental and management and nuclear programs, cases where actual contract costs far exceeded the original cost estimates. This is a problem we need to solve. In order for the DOE and Congress to make informed decisions about allocating resources, we must have accurate and reliable information. Mr. Trimble can give us some examples of how inaccurate cost estimates impact the agency's ability to function efficiently and effectively.
Sure. I mean, well, aside from the examples I gave in my testimony, you know, the obvious ones of MOX, WTP, UPF, you have other issues involving, say, projects. So, for example, the pit disassembly building, which was entered design. It was supposed to be an adjunct to the MOX facility, $730 million spent before it's canceled. I think what's interesting about these cases is that in all of them, at the very beginning, the critical decision point 1, there is no requirement currently for an independent cost estimate. So DOE can start a project and go a long time before it hits the decision point 2 requirement, where you'd actually have an independent cost estimate requirement, but we've already spent tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on these projects. So you start on a path, the control weakness hits you early, you spend a lot of money, and it takes a long time before you're in a position to rectify that.
What are the reasons we've seen so many cost increases in the past, and how can DOE do a better job of producing cost estimates that are accurate?
Well, in the past, we've recommended that at CD1, that's the decision point early in the process, that there be an independent cost estimate. We've had past recommendations, for example, to have a cost policy. Right now, there's guidance, but there's not a policy. The department had guidance. We first reported on this issue in 1983. Mid-'80s, they instituted a policy. They rescinded the policy around 1995. They put guidance into their processes, but there's no cost policy, which would then tell contractors, hey, you're coming up with an estimate for this project. This is how you're going to do the estimate, or these are the rules I want to see, and what are the marks you have to hit to give me a quality estimate. Right now, we don't have that. There's guidance. That creates looseness in the system and problems.
Deputy Secretary, obviously DOE is not the only federal agency that has trouble with cost estimates. What steps has DOE taken to improve the reliability and uniformity of its cost estimates?
A couple of things, Mr. Chairman. I think it's very important to point out a clarification here. Under our Directive 413B, which applies to the big capital projects, for the first time, we insisted at each of these main gates of identifying the mission, picking the main technology, and so forth, that we do have cost estimation. There's different terms of art of what you call it. But one of the reasons, frankly, sir, why we've gotten in trouble is because people have said, oh, this is too early in the project. You can't tell anything at this point, to which I say, you know, if you're going to St. Louis or to Mars, you should be able to give me the right number of zeros, okay? So we actually have tried, and I invite you to look at 413B, and we'll have your staff briefed on it. That tries to get at exactly the problem that Mr. Trimble has identified in response to your question. Also, it's not only a question of having the requirements in there, but a question of having the metrics. And so instead of requiring a constant manual uploading of data from the contractor to the federal oversight and so on, we're trying to, through what we call the PARS software system, make sure that the very same data that is entered by the contractor is transparent from, as we say, you know, from stem to stern, and that we have got real-time, accurate data on what's happening on the ground, because the real problem enters into it, sir, when we get a gap in the reporting of what's happening on the ground and when it comes to our attention.
Mr. Trimble, do you think that is progress, and is it the solution to the issue you identified?
Well, I think we may disagree a little bit on how robust the 413 requirements are at CD1. And I think that'd be a great question for the record, and we can give you a more robust answer on that.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You go back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson. 5 minutes for questions, please.
I thank the chair, and good morning to our witnesses. This is not news, gentlemen, but one of my responsibilities under the Constitution of the United States is to provide oversight on behalf of the people of Texas 22 of the executive branch agencies, oversight of the Department of Energy. The department's budget remains in the tens of billions of dollars. It covers topics as diverse as financial support for emerging solar power technologies, to safeguarding technology responsible for the most potent weapons mankind has ever created, guaranteeing common sense execution of DOE's mission is not just needed to protect taxpayer dollars, it's needed for national security. There have been problems in the past, but with a new secretary and a new organizational structure, I see this hearing as a first step to prevent problems in the future. And my first question is for you, Mr. Friedman. Inspector General Friedman, I'm sorry, this is for you, Secretary Poneman. In Inspector General Friedman's testimony, he laid out a number of suggestions that he recommends as solutions to some of DOE's problems. Specific ideas from reducing duplication at NNSA to reevaluating security. And many of these sound like excellent suggestions, but they're similar to suggestions from 2012. My question, sir, is what is the process at DOE for considering suggestions that the Inspector General makes? What keeps them from being heard but ignored?
Congressman, with all due respect, they are heard, but they are very, very closely heeded to. And under the Inspector General Act, if my memory serves, of 1978, this is an absolutely critical function in the department. I would be the first to tell you that in an organization of, as you say, about $25 billion budget, 115,000, 110,000 people working, we got a lot of problems. And we are, one of our critical tools is the Inspector General reports. They come in, they get seen at the highest levels by the Secretary and myself, and we take them very, very seriously. We have not, and I suspect we never will, hit 100% in terms of executing against all of the ideas that come in. And in fact, sometimes we have responses and we have different approaches and so forth. But it's, I cannot exaggerate, it is an invaluable tool, and we will continue to use it to enhance our performance.
Thank you, sir. And I'm a Texan, so I'm not looking to provoke a little battle here, but Mr. Friedman, I'd appreciate your comments on the issue as well.
Well, I couldn't have posed the question better if I'd been sitting where you're sitting and you were sitting where I was sitting, Mr. Olson.
You don't want my seat, trust me.
The Deputy Secretary, I've known him for a number of years, and he has been extremely responsive to our reports, and the way he described it is absolutely accurate. I said in my testimony that the 5 recommendations for cost savings that we have enunciated in 2 years sequentially are politically challenging, they are highly controversial, and very difficult for anyone to grasp, get their hands around, and really implement. So I'm a realist, and I understand that while I hope they're considered and I hope they receive serious thought, I anticipate that implementation, if it ever is to happen, is going to take some time.
Well, we need to correct these problems. As I mentioned, some of these issues are very important to our national security in our country. One further question for you, Secretary Poneman. You and Secretary Moniz held a DOE town hall, a forum that showcased some of your new organizational challenges. There, 2 points were discussed that were better communication and improving DOE's quote-unquote tooth-to-tail ratio. And reducing redundancy and streamlining your work are both noble goals. However, it seems to me that there have been long questions about this broader philosophical approach that has been taken in running this department. How far does this reorganization move DOE forward in improving mission execution? What are some of the next steps that are being considered?
Well, Congressman, it was just announced here a week or so ago, so it's still early stages. The first thing we have to do is to make sure that we've got the people encumbering these new positions that will have the capacity to achieve these outcomes, point one. Point two, some of the things we have already started, and the first thing I'll just note, because we happen to have had the meeting, I chair the Cybersecurity Council, which is cross-cutting. Secretary Moniz himself just attended ex officio to show his commitment to this cross-cutting effort. We have got to get better in terms of various IT systems that they can talk to each other so that they can be robust in making sure that our most secrets that you've said are our sacred obligation to protect are fully protected. It's going to be a work in progress, and we welcome, I sincerely mean this, we warmly welcome the oversight of this committee to make sure that we stay on track.
Glad, thank you. I've run out of time, but one great comment about the Secretary. I mean, that being a military officer, one thing the leader can do is get involved with the troops, show them that he cares. And it sounds like he's doing that. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Now recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tomko, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the first time, GAO earlier this year included climate change in its high-risk list. GAO recognized the reality of climate change and found that the federal government is not well positioned to address the fiscal exposures presented by climate change. I'd like to hear from GAO about the risk of inaction and how the federal government can respond to this given threat. Mr. Trimble, why did GAO decide to include better management of climate risks on its high-risk list this year?
The addition of climate change, it's really the way we phrase that is the adaptation or response to climate change from a federal perspective. And the rationale on that is really just looking at the potential federal exposure to the potential liabilities that are associated with extreme climate events. Those changes run from sort of being the insurer of last resort. They involve being a significant landlord of large federal assets, such as NASA facilities, DOE facilities, and they also involve sort of agricultural and federal lands issues. So when you look at sort of the portfolio of sort of chits or pieces we have in the game, all of those areas have potential implications. Changing climate has a potential implication for all of those in terms of the federal government's exposure to liabilities.
Mm-hmm. And you noted in the high-risk report that climate change adaptation is a risk mitigation strategy to help protect vulnerable communities. If we fail to do things like raise a river or coastal dikes or build higher bridges, what kind of adverse impacts might we experience?
Well, absolutely, and I think that's what's interesting about this. If you look at some of the experiences with the recent extreme weather events, there are some very simple engineering changes that have been built in. A lot of the associated costs and economic repercussions of those events would have been mitigated. So, for example, how you attach a bridge to its moorings, the height of the bridge, in terms of insurance exposure for homes, do you have a backflow check valve? There are many, many simple things that are sort of low cost that can help mitigate that exposure. And so that's part of the adaptation focus.
Right. You know, I had witnessed in my district a couple of years ago, Irene and Lee, and the exponentially increased volume of water flowing through some of the creek beds. And so as we displace this infrastructure with the ravages of Mother Nature, it became imperative, I believe, for government to build back intelligently, effectively. And to build the same stretch, same span, or same height on a bridge would just be wasted money. So it's interesting to hear you say that. What recommendations do you have for us to address the high risk of climate change?
With that, I may have exhausted my knowledge. I know we have several reports dealing with adaptation issues to climate change, and I know we've made recommendations to the administration on coordinating federal response to climate change, sort of at the Executive Office of the President level, to coordinate policies for each agency, and I know there's been a lot of action in that regard.
Is your mic on? Is your mic on? You check. Yeah. I think it's dead, but just there you go.
Let me speak up then. Deputy Secretary, if we do not respond to the growing threat of climate change, critical government infrastructure could be at risk. What is DOE doing, or what does it hope to do to protect critical infrastructure and more generally to mitigate the effects of climate change?
This is a huge challenge, Congressman. We're working on it not only in terms of our own enterprise, but we are, as you know, responsible as the sector-specific agency for Homeland Protection for protecting the electric grid, the natural gas pipeline system, and so forth. We have been from the first day of, actually from before Hurricane Sandy striking, at the center of the federal effort, working very closely with FEMA and with the President to make sure that we're taking those steps first on the mitigation side, so that we can reduce the risks of these raging storms and floods the President has alluded to, but also we're working in terms of in the area of New York and New Jersey reconstruction, smart grid, distributed generation, microgrids, so that you can have self-healing grid in the case of a devastating storm, so that the critical places like hospitals and gas stations and places like that actually are able to respond better. It'd be hard for me to exaggerate, sir, the amount of time and effort that this is taking. It's a much larger chunk of our effort in the department than in past, precisely because the problem has become so much greater.
Right. The ounce of prevention here could be a pound of cure when you look at the comeback and disaster aid monies that are required to not only restore and rebuild, but to do it effectively and intelligently.
Absolutely.
So I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Munoz's back now. Mr. Scalise is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you having the hearing and appreciate our witnesses coming to testify. When we got the reports back, and y'all have addressed a number of the items and the problems that were identified, but when you look at the overall DOE budget and you see that 90% of the budget is in essence contractors, when you looked at the agencies that have addressed some of the problems, the two agencies that were still remaining within DOE that were still considered high risk have over 64% of the DOE budget. So there's still a lot of the budget that's still out there. And one of the points I want to bring up and start with Mr. Friedman is going back to 2007, DOE and NNSA have required contractors to implement a self-assessment strategy to identify deficiencies. I want to ask you how you feel that process is working, where you're in essence allowing the contractors to assess themselves to identify deficiencies, considering there is such a large percentage of the overall DOE budget that is going towards contractors. How has this process worked, and how is that the best method to get us the efficiencies that we're looking for?
Well, we issued a report on that, Mr. Scalise, several months ago on the contractor assurance process, and frankly, we think it has not ripened and is not mature, and therefore it is not as effective as it needs to be to satisfy even basic requirements to protect the interests of the U.S. taxpayers. There was a disconnect, for example, between contractor metrics and the pay-for-performance mechanism that was in place. And there were a number of other weaknesses that we identified in that report. So does it have promise? I guess it has potential, but at this point we don't think the department nor NNSA are there.
I want Mr. Poneman to be able to address this as well. How do you plan on addressing those deficiencies that were outlined in the report?
Congressman, I take a very old-fashioned view of this. It's true, and one should note, this committee has noted several times our national security imperative. This structure goes literally back to the Manhattan Project. This is how it was set up because President Roosevelt understood that he didn't know how to have the chemistry and physics and so forth. So it started a long time ago. But my view is still the same one that you would have if you're building a house. The contractor's got the expertise, but you're the owner. That's what GOCO means, government-owned, contractor-operated. What we need to do, Congressman, in my judgment, is to make sure that as an owner, just like any owner would in a house situation, you've got the expertise to hold the contractor accountable. And the mechanisms that we're talking about in this set of reforms, in addition to the things that we've been trying to do in terms of contract management, in terms of transparency of metrics that come out of their performance, are intended to put us in that position to be a smart owner.
And Mr. Trimble, do you have any follow-up on what this says about the DOE's ability to rely on contractors for self-assessment?
Well, we have ongoing work on the contractor assurance model right now. We also have an ongoing review looking at the security reform. So both those jobs are in process. So we'll have more to add later. I think, as Inspector General notes, we've observed some of the problems, and I think in addition to the Y-12 incident, there was a case at Livermore where in 2009 the DOE gave the security force there one of its lowest ratings, and this was 6 months earlier than that inspection. The local site office had given the contractor 100% rating. So again, it's a matter of how do you execute this, and can the system be made to work? And I think notably since Y12, the DOE's backed off from that and is taking a new approach, and that's part of what we're looking at in our new review.
All right, thanks. My last,
Mr. Scalise, could I just
Yeah, sure.
Amplify on my comment earlier?
yeah, if you can do it real quickly, because I have one
I
more
will,
question. I wanna
and
try to
the
squeeze in.
answer seems to me is there's nothing wrong with contractor self-assessment as long as there's adequate government validation.
Yeah, there's got to be
Search.
some kind of
That
extra
to me-
layer
that
of
to me is the-
somebody looking over the shoulder, and
Exactly.
2 eyes are better than one, especially when one of those sets of eyes is the person looking at themselves in the mirror. Want to make sure there's another set of eyes checking that. I want to talk about cost estimates, because that has been a problem, getting cost estimates right. In both Mr. Friedman and Mr. Trimble, you've indicated the need to develop realistic timetables and baselines to try to address that. But you've also talked about trying to break up these larger projects into smaller chunks, whatever the terminology you're using is. Can you do that, and can you still get reliable baselines and cost estimates as you're going forward? How do you plan on doing that? Might ask Mr. Poneman or Mr. Trimble.
Well, yes, sir. Congressman, that precise GEO recommendation we followed. And because we followed, I think that's one of the things that led to the better performance that led us to get out from under the high-risk list for our projects less than $750 million. Yes, you can, sir. You can, under this Order 413, you can have cost estimates at each of our gates of our capital construction projects, mission identification, selection of technology, and so on. And that's what we've got to do.
All right, thank you.
Gentleman's time is
Amount of time.
expired.
Go back to balance.
Recognize the gentlelady from North Carolina. 5 minutes for your questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panel for being here today. Mr. Trimble, you indicated in your opening statements that even in recent work concerning the DOE's management of projects smaller than $750 million, about 30 or so projects did not provide sufficient information and documentation for an assessment of their performance. Can you explain why this is significant and what your feelings are on that?
Yeah, I think this is an issue we've discussed with the department, and they've acknowledged and agreed to work on this. But it goes back to the justification and the paper behind the decisions, and I think this issue has come up in another context. But if you don't have the information in the file on which the decisions are based, it's hard to imagine from an outsider's perspective how the decision was made in the first place, and was it made for the right reasons. But it's also impossible to validate the decisions that were made.
So it really seems like there's really not a process of full evaluation.
Or there's a process, but it's not being followed.
I see. So you believe the tools are there, it just isn't necessarily...
Not necessarily followed in all cases.
Okay, okay. Do you see any other area where lack of information is a hindrance in information gathering in regard to contractors?
Well, I mean, there's lots of, this could go in a lot of different directions. I mean, I think one of the questions that comes up quite often is with DOE uses an earned value management system to track the performance of contractors. Every time we go through where there's a rebaselining, sort of all your road signs from tracking the progress of the project get suspended because you have to rebaseline it. And so your milestones for tracking the performance of that contractor sort of get put on hold. But since this process can take a year, 2 years, 18 months,
that time,
you're sort of flying blind for a little while. Now, they take measures to address that, but that's a significant...
And time is money. I've used that recently so many times. Now, does this also relate to contractor assurance programs? I mean, is this all related?
It's not directly related. It's an enabling issue in terms of more information. The quality and the robustness of your information would support any system. So it's related in that sense.
Thank you, Mr. Trimble. Mr. Deputy Secretary, it looks like you want to make a comment about that.
No, I have not heard Mr. Trimble speak to this fact before, but he's identified a very important problem, which is exactly that. When your project goes off its baseline, this system that's set up to clock it it basically becomes useless to you. And that's the point of maximum danger, to have unrestricted cost growth and losing control of a project. So we, to a first order, have got to put a tourniquet on that particular problem, and then we need to have a systemic fix.
Suggestions on a systemic fix?
Well, look, to me, it all comes down to real-time, from-the-ground data with the minimum amount of human intervention in uploading from system to system to system. We need to know how much pipe is getting laid per day. We have to know what valves are going in, and to keep track where the big subcontracted components are coming in, where's that on schedule, even if we are between two baselines. And we just have got to get a set of metrics and a way to measure that we can monitor real time.
Okay. Mr. Friedman, would you like to expand on that?
No, but I think, excuse me, the issue with regard to getting off baseline and that interregnum before you get back on baseline is what we have found to be a very, very dangerous period. And it sometimes lasts far too long. Okay. So compressing that period would be ideal as far as we were concerned. In other words, once you find you're off baseline, re-baseline the entire package, have a change control system that makes sense so that you've modified, made the whole system rational going forward. Otherwise, we lose the progress that we've made in terms of controlling the project.
Great. Well, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the remainder of my time. I think that was an excellent discussion.
Certainly yields back. Thank you. And now recognize Mr. Johnson of Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I too want to thank our panelists for being here this morning. Mr. Poneman, can you please explain the difference between the department-wide mission support offices and program offices?
Yes, sir. The program offices are the ones that are dedicated to the nameplate mission. So maintaining a safe, secure, and effective arsenal, making scientific breakthroughs, transforming our energy economy, cleaning up legacy waste. The support functions are all the things that you need to make that stuff work so that you do it legally, financially responsibly, with adequate attention to safety and security. Those are enabling elements that support the mission.
Okay. How do these mission support offices work to ensure that management practices, and especially cost estimating, are consistent and effective across the department?
Well, 2 points, Congressman. So far, we took some of the elements that were in our earlier organization, where we had a procurement office separate from a contract management office, because those were two sources of expertise on this very point of cost estimation, and we've merged those in a unified office under a very strong leader. But secondly, Congressman, the reorganization that we've described here today is intended to give that office the kind of support at the senior executive level of undersecretary to make sure that those disciplines can apply enterprise-wide.
Okay. What authority do mission support offices, or the new undersecretary managing the offices for that matter, what authority do they have to tell program offices what to do when those offices operate under the authority of another undersecretary?
Well, of course, all of these authorities flow out of our statute, and under the authority that goes to the secretary, all roads lead up to the secretary and to the deputy secretary. So I can assure you, Congressman, that when I hear from my health and safety people that a program office has a problem, the program office may not disregard that. We are one enterprise, and I've often said in our team to say the mission elements have got to own support. They got to feel that they own the security, fiscal responsibility, but the support offices have to feel that they own the mission as well, and so we try to get that kind of a cross-cut.
Sure. I certainly understand that that's how it should work in principle.
Yeah.
But my 26.5 years in the Air Force and working with major program offices and being a program manager myself, yeah, all roads may lead to the top, but if they're not going down the same street with responsibility and accountability aligned, that creates dysfunction. And it basically then it becomes a personality-driven organization rather than a process-driven organization.
Congressman, a very important insight there. One of my early lessons in this is when I was assisting Mr. Lee Hamilton and Senator Baker when we were asked by Secretary Richardson to look at the hard drive lost at Los Alamos back in 1999. That's what we found. We found that the person who, well, I shouldn't say the person, that the organizations that were committed to the missions did not really feel that personal responsibility for safety and security that was essential to avoid exactly the problem you described.
Sure. Well, do you think that this might create more problems by stovepiping mission support? Are you
Oh, to
concerned
the
about
contrary, Congressman. I think what we are fighting against this. In other words, we believe that this reorganization is going to synthesize and bring together mission and support in a much better way than it has been done before. We wouldn't do this organization otherwise.
Okay. It doesn't appear that the chief financial officer is in this new structure. Is the CFO an important mission support office, and does the CFO have more mission support authority than the management office or the CIO, for example?
Well, the CFO, Congressman, is under the Undersecretary for Performance and Management, so that would be right alongside the other mission support offices such as management and administration. So that is, obviously the CFO has huge enterprise-wide responsibilities, and it's very, very important, but in terms of the structure, it is embedded inside that Undersecretary office.
Yeah, I associate my same concerns that I previously mentioned, you know, at least in the corporate world, if all money decisions don't flow through the CFO, and you've got those stovepiped organizations, that makes it difficult as well. Mr. Friedman, you indicated that federal staffing must be sufficient in terms of size and expertise to provide effective control and project oversight so that projects have focused, empowered, and consistent federal project management leadership throughout their life cycle. Regarding expertise, and I've run out of time, what deficiencies have you observed in expertise over the years?
Well, as a general point, Congressman Johnson, we have found that the federal managers did not feel they could exercise the necessary oversight over the contractors because they felt the contractors were so far better prepared for the job and the tasks that they faced. So certainly it needs to be need to be recognized professions. They need to get recognition within the department and outside the department, and the contractors need to understand that they're dealing with people on a par who are prepared to take the necessary actions to ensure that the government's interests is protected. In terms of personal expertise, I don't believe we have found that people were inadequately trained on a personal basis.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Now to the gentlelady from Tennessee, home to many energy projects, Ms. Blackburn.
That's exactly right, and I welcome you all, and Secretary Poneman, I want to come to you and talk a little bit about Y-12. And we all know that April 29th, the GAO upheld a procurement protest regarding the combined contract there for the National Security Complex and Pantex plant. And it was a $22 billion over 10-year contract. You're familiar with that?
Yes, Congressman, but as I testified a little earlier today, since that contract action is still under review, we will not be able to, in this session, comment in detail about the workings of that procurement.
All righty. Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate that there was a desire to get a $3.27 billion savings in that contract. I think that what I would like to know is how can our committee be assured that NNSA's nuclear production mission can be safely and effectively carried out under the big cost savings requirement of that type procurement? What is the guarantee that you can give us?
Well, I can tell you, Congresswoman, that we are operating under presidential direction in terms of what we need to do to modernize and recapitalize the complex. We have a extraordinarily detailed stockpile stewardship management plan, And of course, given the limitations under the Budget Control Act and the sequestration, we need to make sure that we make every dollar count towards that mission. And you have the full attention of the Secretary and myself and the NNSA to that end. And of course, this has to be carried out through these contracts that you're talking about.
Let me ask you this. As you look at what has transpired in this process, has there been any thought given to revisiting the premise of the RFP when you're looking at some of these contracts? Have you all, or Mr. Friedman, have you all given any thought to that? Mr. Poneman first.
Well, again, Congressman, I don't think that I'm permitted to speak to the ins and outs of the RFP since it's still under consideration. But what I can tell you is that we are always looking at those things that we can do to do the mission of the department, for the President and the nation safely and securely, and in a manner that is cost effective, and that would always inform any RFP that we have.
Mr. Friedman?
Congresswoman, I don't really think we have anything to add. I don't think we've looked at that with any specificity.
Okay. I appreciate that. I think that it's fair to say it is an issue that is tremendously important to us. We have a lot of concerns about sacrificing the mission for the cost savings. We have a problem with the possibility of the department having failed to verify the validity of the cost savings. We think that that is something that, when you look at an item that is a critical mission, that it does raise concern for us. So those of us in Tennessee will continue to keep a close eye on this. And Mr. Poneman, I will just say I appreciated your comment about needing a systemic fix to how we approach some of this, and being able to work through real-time data. As you look at a complex like the Y-12 complex, we can see where something of that nature might be helpful. And what we would like to do is to yield a better outcome from the work that is done, and then be able to quantify and achieve some savings through that process, through efficiencies, through technology transfer, things of that nature that will allow a little bit more efficiency. So I appreciate that, and Mr. Chairman, I will yield my time back.
I think, Gentlelady, we were hoping that the chairman of the full committee would be here because he's been, we found his documents, I guess, from the 1990s when he asked Department of Energy a number of questions before about some reorganization, and I think he wanted to come and get an update of what's happened the last 20 years or so, but unfortunately he got tied up. But he will submit those. Mr. Poneman, you?
Mr. Chairman, if I might, I would like to make a slight, before we all break, amendment in discussing with Mr. Johnson, who I know is not here now, the CFO's office. It actually, I thought it was in the undersecretaryship, but it is of such breadth, along with GC and others, that one actually is above the fray, so to speak. So I just want to, we'll get a more detailed answer for the record, but I didn't want to leave you all with the wrong impression here. So I just wanted to make that clarification of my earlier comment.
I appreciate that. Overall, then, we will be submitting other questions to you. We asked for a timely response to that, and members are asked to get questions to us within 10 days. And also, I ask unanimous consent that the written opening statements of other members be introduced into the record. So without objection, we'll do that. So I'd like to thank the witnesses today. And again, as members get more questions to you, we would all appreciate a prompt response. Thank you so much for being here today, and I wish you all the best in getting things working over at the Department of Energy. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.